bjóða velkominn Halldór Eiríksson, arkitekt hjá T.ark og stundakennara við Listaháskóla Íslands. Halldór mun fjalla byggingar Loftleiða við Reykjavíkurflugvöll og stækkun T.ark á skrifstofum Icelandair 2011 í því ljósi. Gjörðu svo vel, Halldór.
Sælverið, gaman að sjá ykkur. Aftur. Ég gaman að koma upp án þess að þurfa að vera alltaf að fikta í músinni. Ég ætla að taka hérna smá tíma og ég held ég bara að prófa að tala þetta á ensku og vonandi lengir það ekki fyrirlesturinn mitt óskaplega. I want to talk about this building or this set of buildings which are usually called Loftleiðir in Iceland. Look at their history and their heritage. And then talk about some of the decisions that we made when we added to one of those buildings in 2011. So this is a blend of a historical exploration of those buildings and of sort of the wonders or the wanderings of us as we added to them. And what we see here in this image is a modernist building. It's a modern image. This is a postcard by Loftleiðir. And you can see the international flags. You see the future. You see a modern society in this picture. But I also want to talk about this picture, which is looking the other way. And we see the barracks that the army left after the war. We see derelict hills. We can imagine this being any part of Reykjavik other than this particular hill that has never been built on. And we see the flags of Britain, of the United States and Iceland that are part of this chemistry that makes this building and its story possible. But we now see that this building is an island representing a future that not really is there at that point. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that image of future. So we can start, and I'm going to entwine this a little bit, the story of these two firms, the architecture firm and the airline. So we can start here. This is the Reykjavik Airport in 1940. And obviously being a key element to the fact that the building is there, but it's also a reason why both Arfleifð, the founder of the airline, and Gísli, as Ásgeir mentioned, came back to Iceland and actually started their firm. So in 1940, this firm was founded by Gísli and Sigvaldi. And 4 years later, Arfleifð and his colleagues came flying from the States after their pilot exams, brought with them a plane they bought, and were hoping to get a job at the Flugfélag Íslands, which neither had the money to buy their plane or hire them, so they founded their own company. They were pretty clever about finding ways of making money out of their airplane and quickly became a competition, creating an issue about ineffective flight plans in Iceland and constant discussion by the state about merging the two airlines. At the same time, and now at this point, these guys are 30 years old. Gísli and Sigvaldi are participating in competitions like this one for a retirement home. And just take a quick thought about the differences for the people that were supposed to live in this retirement home to the places that they grew up in and were used to. And I think that one thing we have to keep in mind about modernism is the fact that these kind of changes were thought of as inevitable and as good. And because this was a nation-building project for a very new democracy. And they participate in a competition for a city hall in Reykjavik. And again, we see this future, this eagerness to create a nation amongst nations, eagerness to be part of the progress, which I think is a critical item for both these men and the existence of these buildings I'm talking about. Around the same time as they are struggling, working mainly in housing, but participating in these competitions, Loftleiða becomes bigger and bigger, starts flying between Iceland and Europe, and then is the first airline to start flying to the States. And that, I find, is a critical juncture for Iceland in itself. All of a sudden, it's not an end point. It's a connecting point. And before that, even ships basically thought of Iceland as an end point. You didn't sail to Iceland on the way anywhere else except in the war as they were going to Russia with war supplies. So all of a sudden, Iceland has been a connecting point between two places. And I think this is a very critical point in sort of the social psyche of Iceland that happens, and it gets built up through this and around this company, Loftleiða. As Loftleiða is starting to fly across between, Gísli builds a private house for Agnar Kufu Hansen, who was the flight commissioner in Iceland, flugmálastjóri. It's interesting that Gísli and Agnar are around 34 years old as they're doing the private house. And they're about the same age, and a year between them. And they grew up in Reykjavik, and I don't know if they knew each other in Reykjavik, but we know for a fact that they were in Denmark together studying, receiving grants from the Dansk-Íslenski Sambandssjóður in 1936, as well as Nína Tryggvadóttir, who will be showing up here a little bit later. So there's a fair chance they actually knew each other, although Gísli says nothing about that in his biography, but there's a fair chance that they were well acquainted. And one thing that I like that maybe brings this in, because we know for a fact that Gísli was a friend with Þorsteinn Einarsson, who was íþróttafulltrúi ríkisins. So we all of a sudden have three men that were very critical in nation building in Iceland, surrounded with Gísli supplying some of the architecture work for both parties and being acquainted with both of them. And Gísli being responsible for buildings, the actual buildings itself, starting to get into politics through the sports federation, which he participated in. Þorsteinn as the single point of contact for building sports facility in Iceland and communal halls, and then Agnar Kufu Hansen responsible for building up aviation in Iceland. These are sculptures by Sigurjón Ólafsson of Gísli and Agnar. So we have to keep in mind this kind of nation-building thought as we talk about these buildings. And Gísli helps, he builds a private house for Agnar. He then starts helping him, as Gísli described it. Þetta var leyst með því að rusla svo lítið til, teikna upp nokkra bragga og rífa niður aðra sem stóðu á óhentugum stað. Þetta var ekki uppbygging. This wasn't a build-up. This was sort of shuffling around old wartime leftovers. But this was the initial start of Gísli's relationship with the airport. Something critical happens around 1950. The profit from the war, the Marshall Aid, and the money that followed that is done. It's gone, and the herring hasn't arrived yet, and everything gets rationed, and the Sigvaldi leaves the teiknistofan, and Gísli is left alone on his own kitchen table with his office. 3 years later, he builds his own house. There's a little disjoint there in the sort of economical and personal story there that somebody else can probably explain better than I can. And he moves his office to the parking garage there. But at this time, there's very little work because it's very hard to get any supplies to build apartments, even though there's a great shortage of apartments in Iceland. At the same time, the government, which, as Hjalmar talked about this morning, had a tendency to want to interfere in most things, decided that they would simply decide who could fly to which place. And out of that, Loftleiða got a very small share and an unfair share to them. So they basically closed shop in flying inside Iceland, sold all their smaller planes, and started focusing on flying to Europe and America. And in 1952, they really start pushing the idea that because they cannot compete in the quality of airplanes, they start competing on cost. So they start flying Americans to Europe and European to America on the theme slower but lower, and become the first low-cost airline in the world. And they face a lot of obstacles in that process, because a lot of the state-owned airlines fight them on this, and they get pushed out of the airports in the countries where there are strong national airlines. So they end up in Luxembourg with actually the aid of Agnar Kufa Hansen, again, finds this niche, a European country that has an airport but no airline. So they managed to create this buffer zone of flying back and forth, and basically become independent of Icelandic economy and grow quickly. Around the same time, Gísli becomes deeply involved in politics, and he is building up apartments in Iceland. He at least claims that he is one of those people that initiated getting Bredstorff to Iceland for the planning, the big city planning of 1962 to 83. And so he is working on those schemes and working on progressing those. But but before that zoning plan takes place, Agnar asks him to design a flight tower, a new flight tower at Reykjavik Airport, and a terminal. And what we see here is the first one, and you can see that there's a fyrsti áfangi, a first phase, which is actually the tower that got built, one floor lower though. And then there's a big office building, which I don't know who was supposed to be in, but never got built. And then the lower terminal didn't get built either. But it brings up the sort of, you can see him using this kind of formal language in the Reykjavik police station a little bit later. But I want to talk about the location, and this is an image from the same master plan of '62 that brought us the Breiðholt that Augusta talked about. And what you see here is a road, an extension of Snorrabraut and an extension of Sóleyjargata that reach a point at Öskjuhlíð and then go down Fossvogur up to Breiðholt. Basically, Gísli located his terminal at that juncture in front of the Öskjuhlíð, foreseeing that would be a fantastic gateway into Reykjavik and a sensible location for that terminal. And we see here there's the site plan that came in with the application for the flight tower and terminal. And we see the extension of Snorrabraut, and we see the road continuing down further. He has a problem with Neyðarbraut, like we still have today, so that the Sóleyjargata extension is not shown on this plan. But the flight tower gets built, And if we now we're up to the 60s, and Loftleiða is flying strong across, probably the strongest company in Iceland that is not selling fish, or even if you count them. And they started offering stopovers between 60 and 65 to up to 13 days in Reykjavik in Iceland. And a lot of people of that generation that you meet in the States remember that time. So they are starting also, because they connected us. They created Iceland as part of a juncture. They are also creating the idea that Iceland can be a destination in its own right, that you're not always going somewhere else, and become highly successful in catering that not only to salmon fishing and aristocrats in Britain, but actually to the common people of the States and Europe. They even open up a sales office in Rockefeller Center in New York, which tells you something about sort of the global scale of what they're thinking and their attitude towards it, which sort of reminds us of the city hall that Gísli and Sigvaldi did. And they have, offices all over the States. It's now an international company, and probably the first one in Iceland. So when these two guys meet in the early 60s, Gísli and Arfleifð, their paths are pretty similar. They come back to Iceland in the war, having to create a niche for themselves in their selected profession. They become fairly successful in finding job, and then being almost shut down by a sort of strong-handed state, rightly or wrongly, only to sort of scramble back to their feet, and actually being both in a pretty strong position as they meet. So they have a lot in common, and I think it's probably hard to find somebody that was as close, was a better match for the ideology of Loftleiða at that point to build a terminal for them, which is what he was asked to do. And you can see them, the two of them are here on the left, the second from the left on the two images at the opening of the hotel. And it's probably through Agnar that Gísli gets connected to this, having done the terminals for Agnar earlier on. And here you can see the first sketches, which actually shows the offices at 4 stories. We did add the 4th story to it. It only got built as 3 stories. And then the Loftleiða terminal, and then a big terminal that is thought of as a general terminal. And we can see that better here, that the light-shaded one is the terminal that Gísli believes he will construct for Agnar Kufo Hansen and the Flight Commission at a later stage. But Loftleiða gets their one there. But it's well known that the terminal never got built because the international flights all went to Keflavik, but Loftleiða know how many people are staying over in Iceland and see the value of creating a hotel. So they ask Gísli, okay, how can we build a hotel on top of these foundations that we already dug? And he goes back and does the calculation, says, okay, we can do it. And how about 16 months, they say. And what happens then is an incredibly quick construction of a new building. They'd already built the office building, but in 16 months, they built a 4-story luxury hotel. And on the same foundations, widening it out for the dance hall, and even adding a little bit to it, to the south, a little terminal for the domestic flights that they still had. These are the sort of plans and what got built for the hotel. And it is almost a European effort. They have Swedish tiles and Swedish craftsmen coming with the tiles, do that. The Belgian window fronts and Belgian doors and cabinetry. They have furniture from Akureyri, and then they have to combine all of this and walls from Norway. And it is really an international work, simply because at that point, in the middle of the booming years of the herring, it was very hard to get Icelandic workspeople. So it's almost an international effort that this hotel gets built. And Iceland, Loftleiða simply flies, when the roads close from Akureyri, they simply fly 4 or 5 or 6 plane loads of furniture from Akureyri, using their capacity to aid the process. And it is hard, and it wasn't a thing I realized, but maybe some in the audience do remember this. But it seems to be that Loftleiða was a massive phenomenon in sort of the Icelandic psyche as entrepreneurs, as some sort of Vikings that we dare not speak of now after the financial crisis. But it's pretty impressive on its own right, although I'm not going to spend too much time discussing that. But it got opened, it got a lot of attention, and all of that attention was positive. It didn't matter what political party you were a member of. All the papers loved it, liked it, impressed by it, by the quality, by the modernity of it, and by the new life, the new society that it presented. And the technology of it, they had a radio in every room, and you could even get a television if you needed it. Probably not on Thursdays though, but all other days. I'm going back, sorry. Yeah, and obviously it has a swimming pool in the basement, which was unheard of, and got a lot of attention, got advertised in the papers. They had male hours and female hours. And with all this sort of sleekness and speed and international travel, there's always a certain sex appeal. And airline hostesses have always been a big, going through posters from Loftleiða and others. It's actually pretty scary how much hostesses were used as a bait for airlines. But that sex appeal is definitely part of the Loftleiða complex as it opens up. You have these Swedish girls coming over for photo sessions in the swimming pool, and even outside the hotel. And it is the hottest dance hall in town. The restaurant's open at 4 in the morning, so you can always come after whatever you've been doing on Friday or Saturday night. You can come and have your breakfast there. And up there in the which corner? The upper left is Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, our later prime minister, and she's also she was an airline hostess for Loftleiða, and I'm not sure it's in the job description anymore to pose in a sauna for hostesses, but she's there. But she's also there on a political poster for a social democratic young social democratic meeting at the hotel. So her involvement in the hotel is substantial, at least documented. So the art also talks about modernity. It also talks about sort of new things. Through the sound barrier is the sculpture by Ásmundur Sveinsson. Nina Tryggvadóttir, who we mentioned earlier, was studying at the same time as Agnar and Gisli in Denmark, does this mosaic. This is her last and biggest work, and it's actually constructed or installed in 1970 after she has died. Again, the modern movement does not waver. it is a progress onwards, and that's sort of the image there. Sorry. And until somebody, proves me wrong, I'm going to claim that this, in the 69, is the first time an Icelandic firm sees a reason to have a global map explaining what they're doing. And, we can probably, it's interesting if we can find others. But it's a pretty massive. They had at their peak 4 times more travelers than Iceland has at their best now. So it was a substantial firm. I'm not going to go into detail of that, but they had subsidiaries in Luxembourg, in Bahamas, and elsewhere. 1970s, they added to the hotel out here to the front. And in 74, when Loftleiða and Flugfélag Ísland merged, they added the north-south wing of the offices there on the right. And the offices are the lower L-shaped building, and the hotel is the higher 4-story building here at the front. But it's explaining this like the success story I've treated it. It's also interesting to think about it that instead of having a that might have sort of been in the back of Gísli's mind around the later stage of his life, that instead of having a well-connected terminal, we have a badly connected hotel at this point. So it is, and because of how the merger between the two companies happened, which was very badly, and Loftleiða felt itself treated badly, and there was some heavy handing by the state. Some of this charm of Loftleiða and this image of Loftleiða has waned quickly. But the heritage of Loftleiða, as shown in these buildings, is pretty interesting to think about. Then what did the other airline, the state airline, do at the same time as Loftleiða was doing this? And frankly, it isn't much. The heritage of Flugfélag Ísland isn't really existing. So what we have, and so it's at this juncture that we start adding a floor to the offices. Not really being aware of the history I've just told you, but learning it as we started researching what we were going to do. The first initial sketches started talking about sort of a penthouse, kind of a smaller penthouse on top of the building, as you see on the lower. Partly because we had to pull it back because of height restrictions for the planes. But as we started researching this, I started asking myself the questions. And generally I believe that we built for our generation, not the one before, not the one after. And the best we can do is try to do that as well as we can. But having these, but maybe because of the scale of this being simply one story on top of a fairly large complex, and the speciality of that heritage of these buildings, it quickly became clear that anything but simply extending the building upwards seemed strange, seemed alien. We have not been working with the hotel itself and those changes that have happened there, but I feel that there are chances there to talk about this heritage more clearly in that as well as in the offices. I'm already over time, so now the question is, what do I show of what we actually did? And I'm going to go very quickly over just once we had decided, okay, we're going to build straight up. We started going to Isavia, explaining the height restrictions didn't make sense because there were higher building next to us. And they smartly agreed with us so that we could simply push the building straight up. But then we had the issue of the construction of the two wings were for the roof, so the two buildings were different. meaning that we had a height difference between one and the other, meaning that once we do the facade again, because we had to replace the whole facade of all the building, the green bands on the outside of the building had to be the same thickness, obviously. So finding the golden ratio where they all matched but would make sense as windowsills on every floor was a bit tricky. And we ended up, this is the original sketch for the 75 edition, and this is our drawing. So basically we stole 5 centimeters of the windows and added to the green bands, and then it added up quite nicely for both floor elevations. But because it was a mixed construction, we could thin the panels, thin the window frames, so we would gain those lights, the lights that we missed, by having a much narrower band and sort of underlining the structure, the modernist structure of the building at the same time. We even embedded, because some of the framing that had been in there was due to the fact that they actually framed with gypsum or plywood the electrical cabling coming down from the system ceilings. But we could embed that with gluggar and drainers. We designed a special profile with a pocket at the back so that it could take those electrical currents straight down wherever they needed them. But one thing we did change, and now we come back to inhabitants about what do we change and how do we change it, is the fact that the panels ran in front of the big main stair, blocking the view as you walked up the stair to the city. And what we did was simply we opened it up. We left, and this is very dark on the screen, put glazing in there instead of the green panels. We can always switch them back to green, it's no problem. But what it does is it opens up the whole view to the city and gives a much grander impression to the outside. We did that also on the south side, echoing basically through the building at that location, and at the end of the building as it faces the airport. We did some studies with the agent of Nina Tryggvadóttir and her daughter, figuring out what was the best way to put a fence, because there's an escape route up to the roof now, and ended up designing a very slim railing that they liked as not obtrusive towards the artwork. And what I maybe like most is the fact that once húsakönnun was done on the airport in 2013, they inspected the house and found out that it had been renovated on the outside in 2011. They didn't realize that we had added a floor to it. And I think that's probably one of the nicest compliment I've gotten to this building. So that's it. Thank you. Sorry I'm long.